So thank you for taking the time out today. Today's session is, as we said, all about meeting effectiveness. So by the end of today's session, I hope that you'll have some new tools and a few techniques to ensure that your meetings pay off in results. And by pay off in results, what I mean is that your meetings stay on track, right? So stay focused on the agenda items that you've identified. So many of our meetings get off track and we waste time. So that your meeting stays on track, is productive, and results in actual action items and understanding of what are we going to do next, right? So real clarity in movement forward, or real clarity and buy-in and support for the information and decisions that were shared within the meeting. So we'll talk a little bit about what makes an exceptional meeting as we move through this. And the goal is to give you some new tools and techniques so that you can take greater control of the meeting and enable greater participation and focus within your meeting. So really want to start with all of you having a little bit of a brainstorm there in your room. And thinking about, because at the end of the day, when we get together in a meeting, it's really about working as a team, working in groups. And so I want you to think about group work for a little bit and just brainstorm, what are all the advantages of coming together in a group to get things done? You know, what are all the benefits of that? And what are some of the disadvantages of group work? So if you can just list those, take 2 minutes to do that, and then we can regroup.
Ben, je pense que c'est de tout l'idée de tout le monde, puis que tout le monde c'est au courant, comme, tu sais, au lieu d'envoyer 50 emails, ah ben ça c'est pas correct, c'est pas correct. Comment on va expliquer ça, là, je sais pas. Oui.
Chaque personne en a fois.
OK.
Le désavantage, des fois, c'est qu'il y en a qui ne fait pas de démordre, là, ça fait que les stocks, ça change l'agenda.
Oui, qui va à côté, là, qui
des avantages aussi, ça peut être d'essayer d'avoir tout le monde, là. C'est difficile d'avoir.
Oui, de tout regrouper le monde.
Une heure avec 10 personnes, 15 minutes, une à la fois, ben,
Le
message est peut-être plus consistant aussi, là. Si je te parle un peu, je te
fais
là, je te reparle un peu d'autres choses.
Le message est le même.
Okay, let's open this up for all of us. So what are some of the advantages that you've identified?
More brainstorming, more ideas flowing.
Great.
You get to speak to everyone once instead of one individual, the same story 10 times.
Absolutely.
And you save time also.
Yes.
What
else?
Different views, yeah.
Different views, yes, that's absolutely key. Anything else? Okay, and so what are the disadvantages then that you identified to coming together in a group to get things done?
You get off track because there's more people talking.
Absolutely, we can easily get off track, distracted.
And have opinionated people that won't stand, and it's harder to get an agreement between 10 people instead of just 2.
For sure, for sure. So consensus can be difficult, right? Bringing everybody on side, absolutely, with different opinions.
And it's hard to get all the people at the table at the same time with all our full agendas.
Ah, so getting everybody at the meeting, making meetings a priority and getting people to show up?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, good. So absolutely, what you've listed, whoops, is accurate. Sorry, I thought I had, oh, there it is. Okay. So here are a list of advantages and disadvantages, and this isn't a full list, and you've identified many of them. You know, one of the main advantages is that when we come together as a group, we can really pull together towards a common goal. And if all of the advantages that are listed here, you know, are present, where we are able to tap into each other's ideas, where we are able to really listen to one another and work towards consensus and open the communication as opposed to shut it down, then if your meetings are running well, then you're actually going to achieve more in less time. Okay, so when we're able to leverage each other's strengths and different experiences, when we can share the workload, then we will achieve more within less time, and we will make better decisions when we're tapping into the different skill sets and ideas of those in our group, of those around the table. The different disadvantages, though, are that there could be too many opinions, like you said, too many ideas, different personalities, and difficult behaviors to manage as a facilitator, especially, or a team leader in a meeting. There's also varying degrees of participation. Some people don't speak up at all, and other people take over the conversation, right? And as a result, it can take longer to get things done, or we end up having 5 meetings to accomplish what it could have happened in 1 meeting. And so the reason why we're talking about the advantages and disadvantages is because as the meeting leader, it is your responsibility ultimately to ensure that your team members are experiencing all of the advantages to coming together in a meeting or as a group, and avoiding as many of the disadvantages as possible. So that's your main overarching goal, because when you are focused on ensuring the advantages take over, are more present than the disadvantages, then ultimately you're going to have an effective meeting. So today is about giving you some tools and techniques to ensure that you're leading meetings where the advantages are achieved and experienced and the disadvantages aren't. Okay, so I think we talked about some of the meeting challenges, you know, in the disadvantages. So as facilitators, when we talk to team leaders or directors or meeting facilitators, when we say, what are your biggest challenges when leading a meeting? These are the ones that come out most often. A, staying on track, right? Staying on topic and on time, and, you know, not being able to get through the agenda. You know, we often don't even get through the first or second item and have a whole 10 items to get through. Another challenge is ensuring participation, so that those people at your meeting are actually asking questions and sharing ideas and not just, you know, checking out. Managing difficult behaviors and personalities, ensuring people show up at the meeting, both mentally and physically. And then also another challenge is ensuring people actually follow through on what they say they're going to do. Okay, what they commit to do at the meeting that they follow through on. Is there anything that you feel is missed here when you think back to you leading your meetings? Is there anything else that's a challenge that isn't addressed here?
That pretty much covers it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So these are some of the things that we want to give you a couple of tools to deal with, to address today, all right? So today we're going to look at all of these things, okay? The meeting leader's 5 responsibilities, an agenda template that will help you make the most of your meetings. Also the meeting facilitation map, which is a step-by-step process to follow for your meetings that you can actually use when you're, I know a number of you are planning large team meetings to talk about goals or develop a team agreements, for example. So this is a good tool to use for that. Meeting agreements we're going to talk about, which are similar to team agreements. A tool to help you capture ideas and come to decision making and achieving consensus. Okay? So the 5 responsibilities of a facilitator. So when you're leading a meeting, you have 5 basic responsibilities. If you can live up to each of these responsibilities well, your meetings will go well. Okay, so your 5 responsibilities are first to clarify objectives. Okay, so what do you think I mean by clarifying objectives? What does that mean?
Explain the purpose of the meeting, what we're trying to achieve by the end of the meeting.
Okay, good. Absolutely. Explaining the purpose of the meeting and more specifically, what is it that we want to achieve by the end of the meeting? So why is that so important?
Well, if we deviate during, by conversations during the meeting, then we can remind people, hey, that's not what we're here for. Let's get back to the subject.
Absolutely, absolutely. And oftentimes when I sit in on meetings, we go right to everybody arrives and then, okay, what's the first item on the agenda? And we just go to the first item, right? And so exactly as, was it Elise that who was speaking?
Yes.
Yes. So exactly as Elise was saying, that ensuring everybody understands what it is that we're here to achieve is key, because you can then use your objectives as a meeting management tool to keep your discussion on track. Because when discussion goes off track, and it will, you can simply stop the discussion and ask, is this discussion leading us to our objective of reviewing our accreditation requirements today, or whatever it is, right? And if the answer is no, which it likely will be if it's off track, you can say, okay, let's table this discussion for our next meeting, and then you bring the discussion on track. So it gives you a tool to take control of the conversation and bring it back on track. It also ensures that people are aware of what is expected by the end of the meeting, that this meeting isn't just for the sake of talking, that we have a very clear objective that we need to achieve, so we'd better be focused on it. The next responsibility that you have is keeping the discussion on track. And that means keeping the discussion on topic, and you can use your objectives to keep the discussion on topic and on time. And so I'm going to come back to the 5 responsibilities in a minute, but I want to share with you a tool that will allow you to make sure that A, the objective of the meeting is understood, but B, also that your discussion stays on topic and on time, okay? And this is called the Vital Agenda, and you all have a copy of this, no?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this is an agenda that we recommend be used with all of the organizations that we work with. We do a lot of meeting facilitation training. It's one of our biggest workshops, actually, because everybody's so sick of wasting time in meetings. And we developed this agenda a number of years ago, and it's still being used by organizations literally around the world. And so this agenda will help you ensure that the objective is known, that you stay on topic and on time, and that you're using your meeting time wisely, okay? And that you're ensuring participation and engagement within your meeting. So it accomplishes a lot of things for you and for your meeting participants. So most agendas that I see in organizations often simply have, the location, the time of the meeting, and then a whole list of items that are going to be addressed. Sometimes there's an overarching objective, but oftentimes I see a list of items. So share with me a little bit, what do your agendas look like?
We started to put like the item, the owner, and if it's for decision information, that we do have on our agenda.
Oh, okay. So you've so have you always had that? That's great.
No, we haven't always had that. It's only at a few meetings, maybe not every meeting, but like our leadership meeting, we have that on there. So that, because that was one meeting where we felt we were wasting a lot of time. So
right.
Okay, let's relook at how we're doing, and that's why we added this on.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and so how does that column then help you, the meeting facilitator? So when you add that column to your agenda for input, decision, or information, from the perspective of you, the meeting leader, how does that help you in preparing for the meeting?
Well, we know what needs to be done for this item, so you know, if it's just for communication only, then we know they're just going to tell us something, and that's it. And if it's decision, well, it's going to take longer because the group is going to discuss, and then we'll have to make a decision.
Okay, great, great. And so, and what does that column do for the person receiving this agenda ahead of time? How does it help them?
Well, if there's a decision to be taken, if we have time, we might research a bit on the subject to
for the meeting,
to come prepared and have our own ideas voiced during the meeting.
Okay, great. So it helps you be prepared for the meeting.
Yeah.
Be better prepared so that there's better discussion and a better decision at the end of the day. Okay, great. Now, as the meeting leader, when you're developing an agenda for a meeting, and you have this column and you see the majority of your items for information, what does that tell you?
Yeah, it's not going to be a long one. That's what I was going to say.
Pardon me? Sorry, I missed that.
It shouldn't be a long meeting.
It shouldn't be a long meeting if it's simply for information. Okay, what else does it tell you as the meeting leader when you're preparing the meeting, when you're designing the meeting?
Well, it tells you that you want to communicate things to your team.
Okay, it tells you want to communicate things to your team. Absolutely. What else might it indicate to you?
That a decision has already been made for these items?
Okay, potentially that a decision has already been made for these items. What I'm been made and no input is required. We're simply updating you, which is needed. We need meetings to be able to update one another. However, if all of our meetings are simply downloading information and updating people, that's when people check out. That's when people don't find meetings relevant. And oftentimes for information isn't always relevant to all of the people in the meeting. Right? So that's when we start to see people not showing up to meetings and not participating because it's always a download of information as opposed to something that's very engaging. And so if you see that your entire meeting or the majority of the meeting is simply for FYI, here's some information that, yes, you need to know and it's important, then my recommendation to you is ask, is this meeting worthwhile having? Is it worth asking my staff to take an hour out of their day to come to a meeting that is only for information sharing? Or can some of this information be shared in other ways? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's certainly a more interesting meeting if people have a chance to talk about it. I agree with you. If you're just receiving information and there's no interaction with the leader, I'm one of those who start doodling.
Right. So we want, one of the goals, one of the goals of having improved meeting facilitation skills is actually to meet less frequently, right? Meetings are highly critical to team success. Okay, that's when we come together, yes, to share information, to share ideas, to make decisions. And so we need to show that the time that we spend together is actually incredibly productive in the meetings. And if the majority of our meetings are more just downloading information and providing updates, that's communicating in part that, you know what, our meetings are just solely for the purpose of sharing information. Once we start designing and facilitating meetings that, yes, include for information only, but also include opportunities to talk about how we're doing, to talk about what things need to be improved, to talk about the next project and asking for input into decisions before they happen. So when you see that your meetings are for FYI, ask yourself, what can I do to make this meeting more engaging? Can I take one of these FYIs off and replace it with potentially an opportunity to talk about an upcoming decision and get their input into it? Any comments about that? And I do urge you to ask, is there other ways that I can share this information as opposed to in a meeting if you do have a whole list of FYIs? Okay. So you have for input, decision, and information. This is probably the most important, one of the most important columns that you'll see here. And then you have the objective. So ideally you have an objective for each item. And why is that important?
I don't really understand what you mean by having an objective for an item.
So what do other people think I mean by having an objective for each of the agenda items?
Okay, an objective might be we need to have this procedure approved, or
Wasn't that the item?
Yeah, it's the item, isn't it?
That's what I don't understand.
well, the item is will present the policy, and the objective is to have a decision to approve the product. No, that tells you whether or not it's a decision. The objective is to decide.
Right, so if we look at the second row here, so for example, the objective is to identify methods of decreasing overtime hours. So having an objective for this particular item, because you might have a number of items on there with different purposes. And so to have a specific objective for each item allows you to do what?
Well, your item is task scheduling regarding overtime. Well, if you don't have an objective, people might think of, you might have something else in mind than decreasing the overtime.
Okay, good. So it makes sure people are on the same page as to why this item is being brought to the table. Absolutely. It also ensures that you know that this has been achieved and now we can move on to the next item. So a lot of time is often spent, you know, often we spend too much time talking about each of the agenda items, and we could have moved on a long time ago. And we spend too much time talking because there isn't a clear objective to be reached that's measurable. And so if we have a clear objective for each item, we can easily say, hey, you know what, we've done it. We've achieved this objective. Now let's move on to the next item. Okay. Then the next item, a column, is pretty standard, or pretty self-evident. Come prepared to. So this is really helpful for your team members. Come prepared to do what? So especially if the item is being brought to the table for input or decision, you want them to come prepared. You want to make sure that you're not wasting time in the meeting on things that could be done by people outside of the meeting, in advance of the meeting. So you want people to come prepared with research having been conducted, with facts and figures, or coming prepared with some ideas that they've given some thought to ahead of time. And this is particularly important for individuals on your team who are more independent and quieter by nature. So if you go back to, for those of you who were in the leadership development session that we did in the spring, do you remember the task process balance profile?
Refresh our memory.
So the task process balance profile indicates whether you're task-oriented or process-oriented, and whether you're independent or interactive, or do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So for those individuals who score high on independent, who tend to, take in information and want to process it and think about it before speaking and before asking a question, versus people who are highly interactive who just speak without thinking a lot of the times, right, and just ask questions and jump in. If you have a team made up of highly independent people, they want to know ahead of time, what do you want me to be prepared to do? If you want me to share ideas, I need time to really think about this and do my research before I just jump in and share my thoughts. So this allows people to do that preparation and feel more comfortable participating. So if you have a group of highly independent people, you're going to have less engagement, likely, less participation in your meetings, unless you give them the opportunity to prepare and think about things ahead of time. Any comments or questions about that? No. And then you have, of course, your allotted time for each item, and then you have your commitments to action. So your commitments to action, this column is actually to be filled in at the meeting. Okay, so this identifies exactly, what was decided and who's going to do what and by when. So it allows you to have a better track on who's going to do what when. And then you can then send out this agenda as a recap to your group that outlines, here are the items, here were the objectives, and this is what we've achieved, and this is who's going to do what. So what does this agenda do for you overall? What are your thoughts about it?
Well, it's going to help us keep control of the meeting and avoid wasting time on things that that are not on the agenda.
Right. Anything else?
It sets the tone for the whole meeting.
Okay, good. It does help set the tone. You're right.
And people who need to prepare will have a chance to do it too.
That's right. And does this this will take more time up front in developing your agenda. But it really does help to make better use of your time in the meeting. Okay. Any questions about this before we move on?
Nope. No.
Okay. So I'll be uploading all of these, of course, the slides as well as the agenda template onto the website tomorrow, so that you can have a soft copy of it if you want to use it. Okay. So your next responsibility as a facilitator is to ensure full participation. And by full participation, I don't mean everybody has equal airtime, right? Because we all have our different comfort levels, as we just talked about, with participation. Some people love to participate and just jump in and sometimes dominate the conversation, and other people tend to be more reserved and like to think things through more. So by full participation, I mean nobody leaves your meeting with an idea they haven't shared or a concern they haven't raised, because you want those in your meeting. You don't want concerns or issues shared after a decision was made. You want it during the decision-making process, for example. And so this is another way, and I'm going to be giving you another tool to help ensure full participation. But your agenda, a well-developed agenda, helps to ensure full participation like we just talked about, right? Allowing people to come prepared. Your next responsibility is clarifying points and ideas along the way. So why is this an important responsibility for you, the facilitator, and what does this mean?
Well, it's to make sure that everyone understands something that was said the same way, sometimes the interpretation might be different from one person to the other.
Okay, good. Absolutely. So again, ensuring everybody sort of has the same picture in their head, same understanding of what was said.
Well, it's kind of the same way as when you're like meeting with an employee, you always say that you have to kind of restate what the employee said to you. So I guess at the meeting, if somebody brings forward an idea, I guess you kind of like restate it the same as you would when you're meeting with an employee in order to...
Yeah, exactly. Reflect, yeah, restate it. Absolutely. So sharing it back, restating it back to them. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
No, we have a hard time hearing. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes?
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes?
Okay.
It's cutting a lot, though.
Cutting out.
Oh, it is. Okay. Will you let me know if is it still cutting out?
No, it's okay now.
It's okay now. Okay, it might have just been a bad internet connection. So the clarifying points and ideas, this is something that I need to be very conscious of when I'm leading a meeting and intentionally remind myself to repeat back to people what they've said, to stop discussion at certain points in time and look to the group and say, does anybody have any questions about what was just shared? Or to ask people to, elaborate. Can you give me some examples just to make sure that everybody understands where you're coming from? So really making a point of, at different times in the discussion, to recap back or to ask for more information so that everybody's on the same page. And if you have a question, if you're not sure about what somebody said, then likely other people aren't sure as well. So your lack of clarity is an indication that other people may also be lacking some clarity. Okay. And then finally, recapping and ensuring commitments to action. So recapping a meeting, is key. So oftentimes, again, in meetings that I attend, people often forget to share the objective, or there isn't an objective at all. And then when we finish the final item, okay, see you next week, and everybody heads for the hills and goes back to their work. So why is it important to dedicate 2 to 3 minutes at the end of every meeting to recap? Why is that important? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because your voice is...
You can. I don't know what is going on, because I can hear you. Okay. Why is it important? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So why is it important to recap?
To make sure that you got
Your point across.
well, that you're especially for minute taking, I feel that you've written down exactly what the person actually really meant to say, like, so that you got it, you've grasped it.
Okay, good. So that you've grasped everything that was said and achieved, absolutely. So recapping is really, this is what we've achieved at the end of this meeting. So recapping what was decided, recapping the commitments to action, who's going to do what when, recapping any next steps that you have to take away, and the recapping achieves a couple of things. It ensures, yes, like you said, Manon, everybody's on the same page, right? And it ensures that people know and are walking away from the meeting feeling as though their time was well spent, because you're ending the meeting by saying, hey, these are all the things that we accomplished. These are the decisions we made, or these are the next steps that we identified, so that people know that their time with you was well spent and not wasted. So
everybody knows what homework they have to do as well?
Exactly. Exactly. And one tip when you're reviewing that quote-unquote homework is to go back to each person who who has a commitment to action with each item and say, okay, Stephen, you agreed that you would do this task by this date. Is that correct? And have them answer yes or no, because studies show that when you can get a verbal commitment to something in public, then they're more likely to do it. So just go back to each person and reconfirm that they're actually going to do those things. So any questions on your 5 responsibilities as a facilitator?
I just had something to say. I was at a meeting yesterday, and someone went to a seminar about meetings, and he said that when you go into a meeting and you are asking input from the members, it's a good idea that the members send their input before the meeting, and then every member's idea is being heard. Sometimes when you're at a meeting, if you're 5 or 6, there's 4 members that are saying all the same thing, so you're going to say, well, it doesn't matter to see what I think. So by sending your ideas before the meeting, well, everyone gets a chance of saying what they really feel about it.
Right, and that is one option. That is one option. And you've listed some of the benefits to that option. What are some of the downsides to that option?
Well,
do you think?
Where are these items supposed to be on the agenda? Your ideas, like, where would that be?
Well, if an item is for input, so you're asking the members to have input. It's not always all the members that's going to give input at one meeting.
That information?
You'd read it ahead of time.
Yeah.
You'd receive an email, you'd read it ahead of time. So when we get to it on the agenda, we have an idea of what they're talking about.
But if I sent it already, do I need to show up?
Yeah, but I find there's going to be way too many emails.
Just that the discussion could be shorter.
And so yeah, there are pros and cons to that approach, and I've heard that approach, and it is something that in highly sensitive situations, if there's a highly sensitive topic that might be cause conflict, or in sensitive situations where people don't feel comfortable speaking up in front of whoever might be in the room, that one option is, yes, to send ideas ahead of time. One of the downsides to that, and I'm going to share an alternative to that approach in a minute, but one of the downsides to that is that it doesn't promote, ultimately our role as leaders is to promote full participation together, so that we are creating an environment where people feel comfortable, share, and are enabled to speak up and share their opinion, and promoting an environment where people are being respectful of one another's ideas and not talking over everybody or monopolizing the conversation. And so in order to do that, we need structure within our meeting, and we need, we need to also clarify expectations that we have of one another in our meetings. So yes, there may be times when that approach, Stephen, would work or would be needed, but I wouldn't use it as the standard, because it does take away from one of the biggest advantages to coming together in groups, which is that open communication, that hearing from one another and sharing ideas together, because that promotes a healthy climate and a productive one as well. But I'm going to get to that tool in a minute that will help you create that structure. And then it gives you more work as the meeting leader, right? That there's more preparation that you have ahead of time, and the onus is then on you to go through the ideas. Also, when we share ideas in person, the person sharing the ideas becomes more accountable to it, right? And thinks it through more, and will be sharing, pros and cons. And so it just creates a sense of accountability for what we're saying, and they're more likely then to share ideas of real value and impact. Okay, so we've gone through the 5 responsibilities. Now I want to go through the facilitation map with you, which you've got, I believe, in your notes.
Yep.
So this really outlines the steps that you can take in planning and leading a meeting. Now, you likely will not use each of these steps in every single meeting that you lead. But if you're preparing for, you've created a new committee and this is the first committee meeting and it's, 2 to 3 hours in length, it's the first time you've come together, chances are you're going to want to use this map. Or if you're preparing for a team meeting that only happens, once every 4 months and it's a longer team meeting that, people are booking out of things to attend, then you'd probably want to use this. But there are a number of items on here that will apply to every single meeting that you have. So the pre-session steps, what do you think? So this is your pre-meeting steps. These are the preparation steps that you, the meeting facilitator, need to do in order to be ready for an effective meeting. The most effective meetings take preparation. And so what would be included in those pre-session steps?
Preparing the agenda.
Yep, the agenda.
And distributing it.
Yes, absolutely.
Having all the pertinent documentation ready as well that you require for the meeting.
That's right.
Ensure everyone got invited.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those, and ensuring that you have the right people in attendance. Okay, so in inviting those who need to be there, and who, if you're making decisions, inviting those who have, by right people, the decision-making authority or the information and background and expertise that you need in order to make the decision. So having the right people at the table is critical depending on the meeting that you're having. Okay. Then the opening. So the opening is basically setting the tone of the meeting and often does include the objective. But what you say and do in the first minute or two of your meeting captures your group's attention, sets the tone, and communicates that, this is an important meeting and we need to stay focused because this is the objective that we're trying to achieve here today. So it sets the tone, it communicates your credibility as the leader, and depending on the tone of the meeting that you want to set, maybe this is a very sensitive meeting with very important decisions that need to be made, or maybe this is a lighthearted, team-building, fun meeting. Whatever the meeting's purpose and tone that you want to set is, your opening should reflect that so that you're accurately sort of setting expectations for your team members. Okay, so your opening may include the objective, and you may not have an opening. Okay, so not every team meeting requires a big opening. You may just go right into your objectives. So the opening you may or may not have. Your objectives you always have. Okay, your pre-session steps you always have. Then the next step is clarifying your role as the facilitator. So what do you think I mean by that? Clarify your role as the meeting facilitator.
I don't know.
So I'm going to give you an example. Here's a way that you could clarify your role. As the facilitator, my responsibility is to ensure we work well together and meet the objectives of the meeting. In order to do that, there may be times when I invite you to participate, ask you to clarify comments, or stop the discussion if it's getting off track or running over time. So that's a very sort of formal description, and you'd want to make it work for yourself. But the purpose of this step is to let team members know, A, what you expect of them, and B, what you might do as the meeting leader in order to achieve the objectives. So for example, as the facilitator today, or our objective today is to make these 3 decisions, and we're very short on time. So part of my role today will be to keep us on track. And in order to do that, if I see that we're really getting off track from our objectives, then I'm going to stop that discussion and bring it back on track. It's also really important that everybody shares their ideas and concerns here today in order for us to have the best decisions. And so there will be times when I'm going to directly ask you for your input and your ideas, and I really encourage you all to ask questions as we go along. And so by clarifying up front what you expect of your team members and what they can expect of you, what does that do for you and what does that do for your meeting?
More productive?
More productive, absolutely. Some leaders that I work with, when it comes to leading meetings, it can be challenging for some people to be assertive, and to step in and deal with difficult behaviors, or to talk, to stop people from talking over one another or monopolizing the discussion, or even to ask people to share comments, to invite participation. And so the act of letting people know what you're going to do up front gives you that permission to do it, and then they're going to be expecting you to do it. So it increases your confidence and comfort in actually doing those things and taking control of the meeting. Okay, so I often clarify my role and in my meetings. As far as what they can expect and what I expect of the team for that meeting, depending on the type of meeting that we're having. Then we have an overview of the agenda. Okay, so this is simply reviewing all of the items and the objectives before getting into the first item. Why is that important? Why is it? Anybody know why it's important to review the agenda ahead of time, at the beginning of the meeting?
Well, usually we discuss also, does anyone have anything to add to the agenda, and if so, that it can be added.
Okay, so that's a good point that you've made. Should we be asking at the beginning of a meeting, does anybody have anything else they'd like to add to the agenda?
I've been to many meetings where it's always been done, but if you tell me it shouldn't, that would...
No, I'm just, okay, yeah. What are the benefits to doing it and what are the disadvantages to doing it?
I guess it shouldn't, because then you're not on track with your agenda, with all the planning you did.
Right, it can throw you off track.
Yeah.
You shouldn't, because it's going to make your meeting time longer.
Yeah.
It wasn't planned in there. People are not prepared for that meeting agenda either.
That's right. Absolutely, and we can waste time talking about, well, maybe that should be next week, and well, maybe we can take off this item to replace this new idea, and then your meeting's out the window. So I agree with the need to invite input into the agenda. So if that's something that you want to do and ask people ahead of time, when you send the agenda out, and say, if there's anything else you would like to add to this agenda, please let me know by this date, 2 days before the meeting kind of thing, if you can, so that you can determine as the meeting leader whether you can fit it in or not. But ideally, that's done ahead of time.
So really, then, if there's no, if we go that way, no addition to the agenda, then what is the overview of the agenda?
Oh, okay. Yeah, good question. So this is simply going through, these are the 5 items that we're going to talk about today. And the reason why this is important is because oftentimes people are coming to your meeting, there may be 1 or 2 people who have, an issue that they want to share or a question that they want to ask. And by reviewing the agenda, they can see, oh, okay, we're going to be talking about this, at 1 o'clock, or, whenever, at whatever point in the meeting. So I'll hold my question till that point. It gives people an understanding of where we're going, because there's going to be people ultimately who will not review the agenda before they come to your meeting. Okay, inevitably.
You should have reviewed it before.
Ideally, we hope they have, but it's a nice way to set the stage as here, it takes 1 minute. Here are the 10 things or 5 things that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. Then develop or use or review meeting agreements, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. You don't develop them every meeting necessarily formally. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Then you get into the actual body of the meeting where you're going through every item, and then you have your recap and commitments to action. So of the must-haves here, you're always going to clarify objectives. Ideally, you're always going to sort of clarify expectations for that meeting and what your role will be. Overview of your agenda, and then maybe you will be developing working agreements, but you will likely be reviewing them. And then you'll always have recap and body. Okay, so I think in your handouts you have a detailed description of each of those steps.
Yep.
We're not doing things right because sometimes we get the agenda at the meeting or we get it 2 minutes before.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So there is, preparation time, right? This does take time for you to do, right? So to develop your agenda ahead of time and send it out. But when these techniques are used, you do have more productive meetings, and so save time and reduce frustration on your part in the meeting and certainly on the part of your team members. And if they are seeing that, preparation is being made and time taken to develop these meetings and facilitate these meetings, that our meetings are taken seriously, then they are more likely to take them seriously and make them a priority. Okay, so I refer to this red square here, develop working agreements. They're also referred to as meeting agreements, which I refer to them here. Now, we talked a lot about team agreements on our last session, and these are very similar, just that they refer specifically to the way in which we interact with one another in our meetings. And so many meeting rooms or boardrooms have, rules of etiquette or meeting rules posted on the wall. So turn off cell phones, respect one another, listen, etc. So how many of you have those sort of standard meeting rules in your meeting rooms? Anybody?
There's none. No.
No. Okay. So many organizations have them, but people ignore them. They don't even notice them because they're just generic, right? And well, of course I'm going to, be respectful. So not everybody is, but it's that sort of assumption when you read it on the wall. So meeting agreements are designed to be very specific to your own team. So what do we need to do in our meetings on a regular basis to ensure that they are as productive and effective as possible is basically the question. And similar to team agreements, you end up with a list of behaviors and practices that your team members identify as being needed in the meeting. Now, if these things are already happening at every meeting, like if your team members are already arriving on time and prepared, then that shouldn't be a team agreement. Because meeting agreement. Meeting agreements are designed to change behaviors and to address behaviors that are not showing up, right? So if people already listen to each other without interrupting, that wouldn't be a meeting agreement for your team. So this set of meeting agreements that you see on the screen here was developed by a client of mine, and it speaks to what isn't currently happening in their team. And so it describes what needs to start happening so that people can hold themselves and one another accountable to it. So these agreements are developed similarly to how you would develop your team agreements. So for example, at your next meeting, you can simply ask, do I have that here? You can simply ask, in order to have even better meetings, we need to do what? And have people share their ideas. And from there, you can develop a list of agreements and just capture them on the flip chart. And if there's anything on there that you feel the team's already doing, you can say, you know what, do you think we already arrive on time and prepared? Okay, so that doesn't need to be an agreement if we're already doing that. What are the most important behaviors that we need to see on this agreement if we're going to be even better? And just ask them to identify the most important ones. And those become your meeting agreements. And so when we go back to this list, the facilitation map, where we have developed working agreements, this then becomes reviewing working agreements or reviewing your team agreements. So before you go into the body of your meeting, you have ideally maybe on the back of your agenda a copy of your meeting agreements, and you can start the meeting off by, hey, let's review the agreements we developed a couple of months ago, just to remind ourselves of what we identified as needed in an effective meeting. Okay? So what are the benefits then to you and your meeting members of having meeting agreements, taking the time to develop them and to use them?
Well, everyone will be treated the same and will be given the same respect as well.
Absolutely, so that everybody is treated the same and given the same respect. What else?
Well, if it's agreed upon by everyone, then they're accountable to that agreement. They're supposed, you know, you can tell them, hey, we're not following what we decided on.
Right, absolutely. So, for example, if people aren't coming prepared and aren't reading the agenda ahead of time, that would be an agreement, right? If people aren't following through on their commitments, that can then be agreement. So it's really also about you, the meeting leader, ahead of time, if you're going to be developing it, thinking it through as well. And maybe that becomes an item on your agenda that says, you know, develop meeting agreements is an item. The objective to identify how we can make our meetings even better. Come prepared with 3 ideas for improving our meetings. Right? So that you can give people a heads up, and then you can generate your meeting agreements. Now, they also, as you all said, really clarify expectations. Okay, it clarifies expectations of the fact that A, the way in which we treat each other and work in a meetings affect our productivity, and B, that the success of our meetings is a shared responsibility. It's not just my responsibility as the leader to make sure our meetings work, it's all of our responsibilities. And the way in which we each show up here and participate or not participate or listen or not listen impacts our ability to have a productive meeting. And so developing them communicates the fact that this is a shared responsibility. And it also creates a way for you to set the tone at the beginning of a meeting. And meeting agreements actually work to prevent disruptive behaviors from happening. So they serve as great reminders that are specific to the team's needs that they identified as important, and help to prevent the disruption and the negativity, if that's part of it, or the disruptive behaviors from actually occurring. So any questions about meeting agreements?
Nope.
Okay. So they will only work if A, they're developed by your group. So those ones that you develop on your own and post on a wall or tell your team what is needed, or, you know, those won't work to change behavior. Meeting agreements work to change behavior when A, they're developed by your team, B, they describe actually visible behaviors so that you and your team members can see when they're happening or not, when they're agreed to, and when they're used. So by used, I mean reviewing them at your meetings and asking the question, how are we doing? Are we living up to these? Because after, you know, a few months, if people are now arriving on time and prepared, for example, then that behavior has changed and that agreement doesn't serve any purpose and you can take it off. Okay, so they'll only work if you're using them. And in my work, similar to team agreements, those organizations, those teams that have incredibly productive meetings are teams that use meeting agreements. And the most effective teams are teams that also use team agreements. So the act of developing these types of agreements is critical to clarifying expectations as to what needs to happen within the team or within the meeting, and to building accountability for your own behaviors and for the behaviors of your team members. Any comments or questions about that?
We're good.
Okay, quiet today. Okay. So, excuse me, to get back to, Stephen, you raised a good point around, you know, collecting ideas earlier, right? Sometimes there are so many ideas, and sometimes, you know, we share the same idea 5 times just in different ways. And so this technique, the generating and organizing ideas technique, is a tool that will give you and your team members a clear structure to generate a number of ideas in a very efficient way where there's full participation. So nobody's monopolizing anything, that everybody has an opportunity to share, and everybody is forced really to share a unique idea in a comfortable, structured way. So are any of you familiar with the generating and organizing ideas technique? Okay, so I'm going to use the concept of developing meeting agreements as an example on how to use this technique. So let's say that you have your team together, and the first item of your agenda is to develop a set of meeting agreements. Okay, so you would introduce the item, and let's say you would open it up by saying, okay, what do we need to do in order to improve our meeting effectiveness? And you ask that question of your team. Oftentimes, teams will, a leader will ask a question to generate ideas, and then we just jump into the generating ideas, right? People just start sharing ideas. In this technique, instead of allowing people just to jump in and share ideas, you ask the question and then give like 2 minutes of silent time for people to independently reflect on the question and jot down their ideas on a piece of paper in front of them. So you would say, okay, what do we need to take a minute or two and think about 2 things that we could do to improve how we work together in our meetings, and jot down those ideas in front of you. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to think about it. What's the benefit of starting off the brainstorming process, so to speak, with a silent generation of ideas? What's the benefit of that?
Well, you were talking about the quiet people earlier on that need time to reflect, and if other people start talking, then I think their thought processes might just, stop, and they won't be able to contribute. Okay, good. Good. So it gives people time to really think through things as opposed to getting caught up in what other people are saying or not feeling comfortable speaking up. What else does it do? This prevents groupthink.
Okay? By giving people time to think through their own thoughts, their own experiences, their own ideas, without being influenced by other people's perspectives, increases the number of unique ideas you're going to have, and ultimately will increase the quality of the ideas and decision making, as we won't be influenced by other people at this stage. Now, when you use the Vital Agenda, you're actually enabling the silent generation of ideas ahead of time. Okay? So if you've already sent out an agenda that says come prepared with 2 ideas, you just want to check in first and say, okay, is there anybody here who hasn't given time to thinking about ideas? Because I'm going to be asking each of you to share at least 1 idea in a minute. Okay, so if not everybody has done it, then you can do the silent generation of ideas. But if everybody has already done it ahead of time, you can skip that step and go to the second step. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next step then is the round robin feedback of ideas. So everybody has given thought already and has their own ideas listed in front of them. The next piece is the round robin feedback of ideas. So instead of saying, okay, who would like to share? You would then structure this from the perspective of asking each person. You would turn to each person and ask them to share 1 idea. And you record that idea on a flip chart or on a piece of paper in front of you, ideally on a flip chart for people to see. But this is simply the sharing of the idea. There is no discussion around why is that a good idea, what does that mean, the pros and cons. It's simply sharing the idea and capturing it. And ideally at this stage, you're turning to those individuals who are less comfortable or quieter, you know, close to the beginning of the round robin, so that they can't opt out and say, oh, John already said my idea. Okay, you want everybody contributing. And so it's simply just capturing ideas. Why is that important? There's no discussion at this point. It's just capturing ideas.
If people start discussing on previous ideas before you get to your turn, and they started saying, "Oh, that's not a good idea," I might be afraid to give my own idea and have it rejected.
Absolutely, right? It may create less comfort, and people might opt out of sharing their ideas. What are some other reasons why there's no discussion at this point? Because we can, sorry, go ahead.
The first idea may get all the discussion time, and by the time you get to the last idea, there's no time left to...
That's right, exactly, right? It's not managing the time well, because the goal is to ensure everybody has the opportunity to share an idea, and if we discuss up front, then there goes our time. We'll spend it all discussing on, you know, the first couple of ideas as opposed to getting everybody's ideas on the table. Okay? So it's just capturing the ideas. Then we can go back and say, okay, let's talk about this first idea here. Jane, what did you mean by that? What are the benefits? What are the disadvantages? And then you can have some clarification, if needed, around the ideas that are shared. Okay, so those first 3 steps, I just need to check something. Those first 3 steps are a really quick way of getting a number of ideas on the table in a way that enables everybody to participate, in a way that will create uniqueness in ideas and prevents groupthink while creating the opportunity for discussion.
Cool.
Now, yes?
You have to do that, generating and organizing ideas at every meeting for every item?
No, not at all. This is just a technique for brainstorming.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, this is just a technique for brainstorming. So if you're bringing your group together to generate ideas to support a decision or to solve a problem, this is a way to do that.
Okay.
And I was just using the meeting agreements as an example, so if you're bringing your group together to develop meeting agreements, where you want everybody to participate in determining what those meeting agreements are, this is a way to do that. So you say, what do we need to do to be to have even better meetings? Take a couple of minutes and jot some ideas down. Okay, Menno, what's one idea for improving our meetings? Okay, and you capture it. Okay, Elise, what's your idea for improving our meetings? And then you go back and say, okay, does anybody have do we need to discuss this first idea? Do you have any questions about it or what it means? So it's just a way to, if you want to brainstorm a number of ideas, this is a technique to do it in a very structured way that enables full participation and prevents groupthink. Okay, so the next piece, I just want to see something here. No, I don't have it here. The next piece, number 4, is prioritizing the ideas or coming to consensus on one, right? And so that's where a bulk of the work happens is, let's say we now have 10 ideas on the table and we need to come to consensus on the best one, the one we all support. And so I'm going to send you a document after this that's about multi-voting. Have you heard about multi-voting before?
No.
Okay, so let's say you have 10 ideas on the table, right? Your team has come up with 10 potential ideas. And you've talked about the pros and cons of each. And now you need to bring the team to consensus on which one they're going to move forward with, which is a tough task to do, right? So multi-voting is a way to do it very efficiently. So multi-voting, if you have 10 ideas on the table, then everybody gets 2 votes. Okay? So, no, sorry, 4 votes. So 40%. So if there are 10 ideas on the table, everybody gets 4 votes. So you multiply the number of ideas by 40%, and that's the number of votes each team member gets. So each team member would get 4 votes. So that means that they can go and put a check mark, right? 4 check marks against one idea, or distribute 4 check marks across the 4 ideas that they think are best. They can use their votes however they want. Or you can give them yellow stickies, or red stickies, or blue stickies, right? To go up and vote on the ideas that they think are best. Okay? And then the top 20% of the ideas, so the ideas that got, the 2 ideas in this case that got the most votes, are the ones that move forward for a second vote or for more discussion. Does that make sense? Or is that completely unclear?
That makes sense to me, but I'm the mathematician.
I'm going to send you the instructions on how to do it, but it's a quick way to do a vote with your team around all of the ideas that are on the table. So if you had 20 ideas on a flip chart and you need to come to consensus on one, people would get 8 votes. They could use them wherever they want, and then the top 20% remain, and you can say, okay, here are the 4 ideas that are left. Can we come to consensus just by talking on which one we want to go forward with? If not, okay, let's vote again, right? So then everybody would get 1 more vote, let's say, and they can apply that vote wherever they want. And then the one that has the most votes is the one that moves forward. So what's the benefit of that multi-voting approach? So using the generating and organizing ideas technique to brainstorm ideas when it's needed. This isn't all the time, but when it's needed. And then using the multi-voting approach to make a decision and come to consensus. How does that help?
Well, the multi-vote gives a fair chance to everyone to say what they think.
Right. It gives a fair chance to everyone. And so at the end of the day, And there's been discussion, right? What's the benefit of this idea? What's the disadvantage? Especially when we come back down to, okay, now we have 2 ideas on the table and we're going to vote again. Let's be sure we understand the pros and cons of each. When we vote and we may not get our first choice, at least we can understand why other people voted for the other option, because there's been enough discussion. We've all been a part of it. We've all had the opportunity to participate in voting. So I'm going to more likely support it even though I didn't agree with it, or even though I didn't choose it. So it's a great way of creating buy-in and support in decision making to enable them to be part of this voting process.
I can see that even with that process, the most popular idea might not be voted, might not win, but the next idea might win, but it would be compatible with more people than the first idea.
Yeah. Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right? So this, again, prevents that groupthink or the most vocal people from influencing too much, right? So everybody gets a say. And this is important because I'm not going to go through the benefits. We've talked about that. Because it enables people to reach consensus. So when we look at decision making, there are 3 types of decision making. Either one person makes the decision, right? So you've brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas and you thank your team for that, and then you walk away with their ideas and you make a decision, right, based on that discussion. That's one option. The second option is to simply do a vote, right? Which is the multi-voting technique, right? Majority vote of the group determines the decision. And then the third is the decision is made by group consensus. And we can achieve consensus through majority voting, okay, when it's the multi-voting technique. When we have a number of ideas on the table and people are informed and discuss the pros and cons of each, and we vote. And we vote based on, you know, the discussion that we've had in that meeting. Consensus can be achieved that way. Consensus means that we agree to support the decision. It's not about the fact that we agree 100% with the decision, because oftentimes that cannot be achieved, but we agree to support the decision. So what do I mean by support? What does support mean? What's the difference between supporting and agreeing?
Well, agreeing means that you are in full agreement, you have the same ideas, the same opinion, and yeah, that's the way to go. That would be you're in agreement.
Right, absolutely.
And support would mean that, well, I kind of have another idea that I think it might be better. However, that's the decision, and I'll go along with it. Okay, good.
Okay, good. That's a good description. Now, in order to in order to achieve support from your team, it's important that, especially when it's a sensitive decision and there may be opposition, it's important that people understand what it means to support a decision, right? So going along with it means what? It means if I agree to support a decision, it means that you expect if you're asking your team members to support a decision, it means that you're expecting them to speak positively about a decision, right? To do what it takes to make it work, to follow through on their commitments, to potentially make it a priority if that's what you're asking them to do. So it's important to define what support means. If you're asking your team members to support a decision, whether they were involved in the decision making and idea generating or not, it's important to be very clear about, again, clarify expectations regarding what support looks like. Now, if you were to flip this around and you were being asked to support a decision that you didn't 100% agree with, what is it that you would need from your leader in order to feel comfortable supporting the decision? What do you need to get to a place of support? And we're going to be talking, this is really moving into change management, and we're going to be talking about this again at the next session because this is really important. But just briefly, what is it that you need to achieve support if you were being asked to support something you didn't agree with?
I guess for somebody to explain it to you, the reasons why it would be helpful for the organization, or?
Yeah, absolutely. The why. Why are we doing this? What's the impact? Why is it important? Anything else?
How was the decision reached?
Okay, good. How was the decision reached? How was it made? Who was involved? What else would you need? So when you're leading a decision-making or consensus-reaching process within your teams at a team meeting, it's important to give some thought to, okay, what will my team members need to hear from me? What information will they need in order to support this decision that I'm making or that I'm sharing with them at this meeting? Okay, so often when we ask the question of people, what do you need in order to get to a place of support? Like you said, they need to understand the why, right? The pros and cons. They also really want the opportunity to be heard. They want to be given the opportunity to ask questions about this decision, share concerns about the decision. They want to know that a variety of options were considered. They want to understand the how the decision was made, like you said. Are there any backup plans, contingency plans? If this doesn't work, how is it going to be measured? What's the expectation of me? How are we going to allocate resources, etc.? So if you're leading a meeting where consensus is required, it's important to remember and to think through what your team members are going to need in order to get to a place of support and to be prepared. So think about this up front in your meeting preparation so that you're prepared for that. Because consensus isn't easy to achieve, especially with difficult decisions, but it becomes far easier when we think about what support means and what people will need in order to achieve it and make sure that they get that information. Okay. So like I said, we're going to talk more about this at our change compatibility, because this is really ultimately how we support people through change, right, is ensuring that they get to a place of being able to support a decision. So I'm not going to go through the steps to consensus now. We'll do that at our next change compatibility meeting, okay? So today we've reviewed a lot in a very short period of time. You've gotten your 5 responsibilities of a facilitator. You now have a new agenda that you can use should you choose to. You have a map to follow. We looked at meeting agreements and the generating and organizing ideas technique that you can use to brainstorm. I also talked about multi-voting, and I'm going to send that off to you as well. And then in our next meeting, I'll add steps to achieving consensus on the change compatible team, because it's key to that. Any questions or comments about this session?
No.
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 Is there anything you're going to do differently at your next meeting based on what you've learned?
Well, I might share the agenda with my team just so that they can have time to prepare for it, and especially if I want to discuss ideas and make a decision during the meeting.
Well,
Okay, great.
You have to be more prepared for meetings. Mm-hmm. How many times do we have people that come into the meeting, you don't even have a paper and a pen when you have to mind the agenda, you know, like I think it's just being respectful, and you need to come into a meeting prepared.
Okay, good. Anybody going to try meeting agreements? Sorry, you cut out there a little bit, Menno, so I'm not sure if I heard you effectively. Anybody going to try meeting agreements?
I think my team is pretty good during meetings. They're respectful, and I think they're all open to ideas. So I don't think I need a team agreement right now.
I think
Okay, good.
what we would need would be for people to be on time.
Yeah, this one is for sure.
Some people are never on time.
No.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all so much. And some of you I'll be talking to before our next session. Otherwise, I will see you at our next webinar.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Bye.